Hey there, welcome along to Collective Church. It is 5 p.m. on Sunday night. It's time for our live liturgy. I'm here with Fred Wilson. Fred, how's it going?
Well, how are you?
I'm doing good. If you're with us, you can chat live, drop us a hello in the chat, and we're going to get things kicked off. Let's play some music, shall we?
Let's do it. Got a wife and kids in Baltimore, Jack. Went out for a ride and I never went back. Like a river, don't know where it's flowing. Took a wrong turn and I just kept on. Everybody's got a hungry heart. Everybody's got a hungry heart. Take down your money and play your part. Everybody's got a hungry heart. Met her in a Kingston bar. Fell in love and knew it had to end. Took what we had and we ripped it apart. Now here I am in Kingston again. Everybody's got a hungry heart. Everybody's got a hungry heart. Take down the money and play your part. Everybody's got a hungry heart. Everybody needs a place to rest. Everybody wants to have a home. Don't make no difference what no one says. Ain't nobody like to be alone. Everybody's got a hungry heart. Everybody's got a hungry heart. Take down your money and play your part. Everybody's got a hungry heart. Everybody's got a hungry heart. Everybody's got a hungry heart. Take down your money and play your part. Everybody's got a hungry heart.
All right, welcome. Thanks, Fred. Thanks a bunch for that. Welcome along to Collective Church. 5 p.m. liturgy. Liturgy is the work of the people. So I'm going to preach a sermon tonight. It's going to feel more like a conversation, not just with Fred, but also with Kenny, who's here hosting, helping to host the online community, and a conversation with you all. We're going to do a little bit of interacting. So if you're with us, hey Jay, hey Kenny, you want to chat with us, drop a hello in the chat. We know that there's a handful of you who are on. Liturgy means work of the people. So even though I'm going to preach, it's our work. It's not just me doing it. It's us doing the work together of working out spiritual community. So the way that you most connect with doing that with Collective Church at this point in history is to get the email. Go to wearecollectivechurch.com. It's a very simple splash page website. It's probably going to take you to the bottom where you can sign up for the email if you're not already. If you signed up for the email, let me jump over here because this is important work we're about to do here. If you signed up for the email already, you've got an email currently in your inbox, and I'm pulling it up here so that I can see it. Freddie and I can see it. We're looking at it right here. So this is actually going to be, we're going to try this. It's an experiment. We're going to do the sort of the welcome and the weekly schedule right out of the email, so there are no questions. You can click on these links in real time. You can be connected. There's nothing in between what I'm telling you now. You can hear the sound of my voice and see me on screen. You can click on these links and be connected with what we have going on this week. So let's scroll through here. If you're not on it, like I said, you want to get on the email. So at the top, it just says We Are Collective. It talks about what we're doing right now. We gather on Sundays to practice. So if you don't hear anything else tonight, the point of all this, and I'll agree, at times you may lose the plot because we're going through our schedules and then we're going to be doing music and we're going to sit silently. What it's all about is that we want to be people who intentionally, and we know that for us that means we can't binge it. We have to do it over time, week to week. We got to do it with some regularity, discipline, practice, all that stuff. We have to practice unconditional belonging and transformative love. And you may be like, man, those are huge words. Those are massive concepts. How do we even wrap our minds around those, much less practice those? Exactly. It's taken the church 2,000 years. We still don't know for sure, but those are still the questions. How do we practice those things? Unconditional belonging, Transformative love. So right under that message, it says stay connected. Now, if you were to click on that stay connected, it's got in that what's called a link tree, which is just a gorgeous piece of technology. At the very top of that, it says sign up for the weekly, which again, if you're not in this email, you should have that. If you're in it, you've already got it. Under that, you can follow on Facebook, subscribe to YouTube. You can jump into the Sunday Post Liturgy Zoom. You're going to need that tonight. So right now, you may be like, you know what? I would love to be more engaged. After the service on Sundays, I'd love to be talking to people in real time, face-to-face. I would even consider doing it on Zoom. But every GD time I try, I can't find the link, and I get in the wrong room, and I get put in a subgroup, or my thing is muted, and I can't. Maybe you're frustrated with it. Let us help you try to streamline that process. It says Sunday Post Liturgy Zoom. You click on that link, that's going to be the same link that we all go to every Sunday after the liturgy. So hopefully from this point on, if you get the weekly email or if you've just got that link to the link tree, you should never have that frustration again. You can get that link, you go straight to that Zoom. Under that, jump over to Collective Cares. So Collective Cares has got stuff going on this week. Dan can share that. Kenny's already been making events for Collective Cares, what they've got going on this week. Oh, see, it's so responsive. I just clicked into it and almost launched that Zoom. You got to be careful. Under that's Monday Yoga. Just consider that paused for right now. Stand by, and then at the very bottom, you can give. And that's incredibly important to support what we're doing. So back to the email. We're in this series, Listen, where we're looking at sort of the summary from the Hebrew Bible of what it means to live a life of faith, that we would listen to the call that we understand as God. We would listen so that we might live lives of integrity of heart and of mind and of soul and of strength. We're talking about what that means and how sort of returning to that kind of simplicity can really be a breath of fresh air, not just in the season of Lent, but after the year we've come out of and the election and on and on and on. So you can find that Facebook Live. The link was in there. Amazing picture of the McCullough room down at the theater for those who came, especially Angela and Doug. We had Jim, Kenny came, Dan Hensley. Lots of people showed up to help with the workday. Huge thanks for everybody that did that. If you haven't had a chance to see the building in a little while, it is transforming, getting ready for us to be in person together again on Easter. Down towards the bottom of the email, in person and online. Again, that's what's going on right now. We're online through Lent, about 4 more weeks after tonight, and then we're going to be in person again. But we're getting the physical space and these online platforms ready. Collective Cares this week, like we said, out of isolation. Check out what they got going on. And then again, at the very bottom, support Collective financially. If you have the means and you believe in good work, we believe that the work that we're doing is good, and we invite you to be a part of that. If you can participate with us by supporting us financially, that would be super, super cool. Let me jump back over and see where we are here in our liturgy, shall we? Freddie, I think we're going to have you read the community statement for us.
I will do that.
Awesome. And then we'll roll right into some music,
huh? We value highly the metaphoric journey, where different people from different places and backgrounds representing an intergenerational community, we've traveled different paths. So we agreed not to make assumptions about the person across from us, next to us, or in conversation with us. We challenge ourselves to be sensitive, knowing this community includes a diverse group of people from lifelong followers of Jesus to people who are just now open to the idea that God might exist. We strive to avoid offense, ask good questions, articulate and explain our responses. We don't assume fluency in Bible, spirituality, or church language because we believe the message of Jesus is not for Christianity, but for humanity. So we do everything in the spirit of love and grace.
We do. Thanks. Hey, Caroline Wilson, shout out to you. Dan Hensley, how's it going? Good to see you on there. Dottie Brewer is with us tonight. Hey, Brandon, how's it going? We have a crew on with us. Awesome. Good to see you guys. Shall we?
Do we know where my capo is? That's the question.
Who
did it?
It's a capo-caper.
Yeah. It's usually right here with me.
Is it in a guitar bag?
I got it. Producer to the rescue.
There it is. Oh, I moved the tablet. Thank you, sir.
Teamwork.
It does make it work, the dream, I mean.
Amen.
All right, where are we? There we go. All right, you're in control now.
cry. Be the one that's been there on a camel's back, slow to anger, quick to laugh. Be more heart and less of time. Be the wheel, not the track. Be the wonder that's coming back. Leave the past right where it's at. Be more heart and less of time. Try, be the wonder that's coming back. Leave the past right where it's at. Be more heart and less of time. Be more heart and less of time. Be more heart and less of time.
Awesome. Thanks, Fred.
Anytime.
All right, if you haven't picked up on it, the theme for our reflection tonight is to do with the heart. And the reason it does is that we're in week 2 of a reflection on a Hebrew prayer called the Shema that comes out of the book of Deuteronomy in chapter 6. And this is sort of the summary for them of the law and the practice. What does it mean? When Jesus is asked to summarize all of the law and the prophets, he quotes this. In the Hebrew faith was sort of a summary statement there. Hear, O Israel, this is Deuteronomy 6. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God. the Lord alone. We talked about that last week. We'll refresh that just for a second. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and that's what we're focusing on tonight. With all your mind, with all your soul, and with all your strength, or with all your might. Keep these words that I'm commanding to you. Keep them on your heart, recite them to your children, and talk about them when you go home, and when you are home, and when you are away, when you lie down, and when you arise. Bind them as a sign on your hand, fix them as an emblem on your foreheads, and write them on the doorposts of your house and of your gates. If you don't have any other context for religion, religious practice, or religious tradition, suffice it to say, the summary is effectively this. Listen up so that you can learn to love with the integrity of your heart and your mind and your soul and your strength, which is a super Hebrew way of saying holistic love, so that you could experience love fully, wholly. And the way that you practice it is effectively, they say, don't forget it. Talk about it. Teach it to people. Talk about it all the time. Think about it all the time, and reflect on it. And so we're taking the Lenten season to sort of reflect on what this means. What does it mean in 2021? What does the word heart even mean? We'll kind of get into that a little bit tonight. But let me read this again, and then we're going to sit silently for about 3 minutes. And as always, you'll have the assistance of some amazing drone footage, and we invite you to allow sort of the metaphor of the drone footage to call you to that own inner perspective, for you to become the lens and the drone over the landscape of your inner life, just to take a survey of what's going on. And so the drone footage today is going to be out over Lake Woodruff. It's over this beautiful marshland. It's tons of water. It's lush. It's grass. And the question, this is sort of a Wesleyan question, maybe a question out of the Christian tradition, but it certainly can span any and all and even no religion. The question, how is it with your soul? And so I'll give you those two things. If you consider sort of taking on the perspective of a drone over a landscape and asking about the landscape of your inner life, and layering over that the question, how is it with my soul? How is it with your soul? Let me read Deuteronomy 6 for you again, and then we'll sit silently together, however is most valuable for you. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your mind and with all your soul and with all your strength. Keep these words that I am commanding you. Keep them on your heart, recite them to your children, talk about them when you are home and when you are away, when you lie down and when you arise. Bind them as a sign on your hand, fix them as an emblem on your forehead, and write them on the doorposts of your house and of your gates. Sit silently together for about 3 minutes. All right. So with some at least inner perspective, we'll say, if we didn't reach some inner peace, coming out of Deuteronomy 6, having sort of reflected on that a little bit, this call to integrity. I want to get into that a little bit more. Let me layer on one more text tonight. This is from Matthew chapter 4. And it begins with the word then, and what's come just before this is sort of the very beginning of Jesus' ministry, where he comes, John the Baptist, baptism, all that kind of stuff. And then it says, then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. He fasted for 40 days and 40 nights, and afterwards he was famished. The tempter came and said to him, if you are the Son of God, command these stones to become loaves of bread. But he answered, it is written, one does not live on bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. It's Matthew 4. And I want to come back to that towards the end of the sermon, the every word that comes from the mouth of God, because hopefully you connect that back. If you haven't had a chance to check out last week, you should go check it out. The idea that God is a call, and that God is a call alone. Because if God is ever more than a call, God is an idol, either an idol of substance that takes shape or an idol of concept that we claim to understand or to know or to be able to explain. So the idea, and part of why we are listening to this sort of ancient command to listen up, is because there's so much noise in our lives, in our world. And we're just asking the question, as a part of maybe what we ought to expect from good spirituality, how do we make sense of what we're listening to? We've just come through one of the most ridiculous and divisive election cycles with more lying and conspiracy and conjecture. So how do we make sense of what we're listening to? Two of the people I respect most in the world, my grandfather and a guy named Jim, who led one of my sort of like spirit quests, spirit journeys. My grandfather, just before he died, this is a guy I listened to my entire life, whether or not I wanted to, right? Coaching me in golf, coaching me in sports, coaching me in whatever. And I couldn't avoid listening to him. And he always wanted me listening to him. But just before he died, he said, listen. But he added one word. He said, listen inside. That was his parting wisdom to me. Listen inside. Right? And so not only was it just, he didn't say, listen to all the advice I gave you in my life. Right? I'm going to be dead, so just make sure you remember and listen to everything I told you. He gave up that seat of control, and he said, listen inside. He sort of pointed past himself. Same with this guy, Jim, who convened this rite of passage I went to in the desert in Ghost Ranch, New Mexico a few years ago. Jim basically said at the beginning of this session, he said, you're going to go out and walk into the desert. You're going to find a place where you're all alone. You're going to draw a circle, and you're going to sit in that circle all day and wait for your teachers. And the thing is, Jim was my teacher. But Jim was pointing past himself. Jim was the one I listened to, and Jim said, you've got to listen beyond listening to me. So God is this call alone, but it's a call that points past all of our idols, whether conceptual or physical. And the trick is, the practice is, those teachers only emerge when you're quiet enough to hear them. So how do we hear the wholeness? How do we hear the wholeness and mute the noise? We learn, which means we practice, listening inside. We'll talk a lot tonight about what that means. And listening in silence. Those are two really practical things that we want to try to become people who are better at doing. Listening inside and listening in silence. So listen up. Listen up. This is how it kicks off. The Shema says, listen up. God is God alone. Not any other thing. Not any other status or idol that we might fashion for our comfort, for our convenience, for our certainty, for our satisfaction, even in the name of God. Even a character in our religious story that we call God, or a religion that we build after God. Still know God is God alone. The Shema says, listen up. Hear that in a world of idolatry, whether that's physical idolatry, conceptual idolatry. Listen up and hear that. The name of God is the name of a call. Not of a statue, an idol, a figure that can capture God in physical form, nor a conceptual framework that can apprehend, explain, or make sense of God. The beginning of the Shema is a connection to the Hebrew tradition that God is a call that resists formulation. A call that is only incarnate, we said last week, in our response to that call. That's the church. That's the body of the universal Christ, is however it is that humans respond to this call. And let's start here. When you're tempted to seek the idols of certainty and satisfaction, which you will be, I am often, don't be ashamed, don't be alarmed, don't be afraid, don't rush, please, to religious piety. Rush into love. I think that's what the Shema is calling us to do. Rush into love. We say, but how? How do we rush into love? In the first thing that it specifies is rush into love with your whole heart. And I just want to riff on that a little bit tonight. On this word heart, this phrase Brene Brown has made so meaningful, wholehearted, which you should look that up and do some of your research on your own on that. I'm not going to get into that too much, but it's been amazing. Let me start here because I think we could talk a lot about the heart, and we could conjecture and theorize and talk theology. But I want to start where you feel it. And I think that's, if I could say anything, I think that's what the heart brings to this experience of wholeness, of heart, mind, soul, and strength. I think heart brings us at least to awareness of feelings in many ways. And we'll get into that. But this is a bit of poetry from a guy that we love named Shane Koizan, and it's in one of his poems. He says, "The heart became a metaphor. If our bodies said enough, our hearts roared more. The heart became the core of our spirit, the seat of our emotion. We throw our love at death, hoping by an act of sheer will we can make it not true. I have witnessed no hearts stronger than those that weep openly at the altar of love, family, friendship. We grip at our hearts not out of sympathy, pity, or charity. We grip at our chest because this is where we care from." So maybe even more than feeling. This is where we care from. And so if you don't get on board with the Bible, or you're not sure about Jesus, or you're not sure what to think of the Christian tradition, or you can't really do the God thing, let me ask you to just join us tonight in this very narrow space, but I'm sure you can join us. Connect with wherever it is that you care from. Connect with wherever it is that you care from. And this text is saying that foundational to a healthy life, to a whole life, is some awareness in the cultivation of that place that we care from. I think that in the poem, Shane is onto something here. He ignites here, using the passion of poetry, this curiosity about what we mean when we say heart. More than the cardio system, more than valves and ventricles and blood. What did it mean in the Hebrew language in Deuteronomy when that was written? What did it mean when Jesus quoted it hundreds of years later? And then what does it mean for us now? What can the word heart tell us about living and loving in wholeness? Hebrew is what's called a poor language, meaning there are very few words, and so one word can mean many, many things, which means each word demands interpretation. It demands really even more than interpretation, it demands engagement. You have to participate with it almost in order to understand what it means, which is a brilliant way of drawing people in. We don't get to stand at a distance with a clipboard and our pocket protector and sort of go, oh, this word means this, definition, usage, etymology, part of speech. Instead, the word tells us just enough to draw us into itself. And that's what we're going to do. That's part of worship. That's part of liturgy. That's part of celebrating our tradition, is letting ourselves be drawn into these stories and these words. So, first of all, the heart in our tradition describes the seat of thought. The heart, and we're going to deal with the mind next week, which really is kind of connected to this, so it's going to be weird. They'll overlap a little, and that's fine. The heart, it seems, according to the Bible, might be what we would consider the seat of thought. Hey, Rick, how's it going? Good to see you. Hey, Bill Brennan. So the question would be, where do our thoughts come from? And again, I'm not talking necessarily in the scientific sense of chemicals and synapses and neurotransmitters. Not how do they travel. Where do they come from? Where do they come from? Where does the electricity that becomes thoughts, where does that come from? And how does it become thoughts? Where do they originate? Where are they created? Where is We might say, what's the flashpoint of imagination within you? And then when it comes to your specific imagination, how come you got that and not somebody else? The Bible would call this the heart, the seat of thought, the seat of creative generativity. The seat of thought, the seat of thought. So sit with that. How does that feel? You can. I see we've got some stuff going on. Kenny's chatting with folks online. Fantastic. Feel free to jump in. So you got the seat of thought. The other thing we might say in the tradition is that the heart would be thought of in connection to intention. What do you intend to do? That would be sort of thought to reveal your heart. What do you intend to do, not by accident, but full of purpose? And here's some sort of good examples of what we are and are not talking about. So sometimes we have people do incredibly unhelpful, even destructive things, but they do it from a good place. They do it with good intentions. They do it for the right reasons. And what do we say? We say they have a good heart, right? So even if someone's trying to do me a favor and they screw it up and they cost me time and they cost me money, but I know this person and I have a relationship with this person and I see not what happened, but I see their heart, don't I? I see what they were trying to do because of their love for me, and I can go, oh, they came from a good place. That they have a good heart. And then the opposite. So we have people who do very good things, but for horrible reasons, right? And very often they'll do the right thing, but then we find out like they did it because they made so much money. And then what do we say? We say their heart isn't in the right place. So they did the right thing, but then we know there's something that feels off. We go, but their heart wasn't in the right place. So maybe they technically did a good thing, but it was not from a good intention. We would think of that as the heart. The Bible would say that would be an issue of the heart. Was it a part of the intention? So back to feelings. And maybe this one's tough when you talk about feelings and the heart, especially in terms of our understanding and practice of spirituality. We're not really talking about the feeling itself, not individual feelings, not even necessarily where they're felt. But again, where do they come from? Where do the ways that we feel come from? So the Hebrews would say that the seat of emotion, where things are felt, is actually not in the heart, but is in the gut, deep down in the bowels. But again, then the question would be, but where does the feeling come from that's felt in the gut? It begins in the heart, they would say. It begins in the heart. So we have this saying, and maybe this makes sense, the fastest way to a man's heart is through his stomach. And the Hebrews would say the flip side is true. The fastest way to someone's stomach is through their heart. But here's what they mean. And Hebrew is a heartbreak culture, and it's a heartbreak language many times. When we're heartbroken, we become sick to our stomachs. And so they're making this connection in where we feel and maybe where we think, but where those feelings and where those thoughts come from, they say they come from the heart. That connection to affection, intention, imagination, creativity. Jesus and his tradition, they might think that comes from the heart. And finally, we might say our inclination or our disposition. So this could be everything from personality stuff, right? Are you an ENTJ or an ENFJ or an INTP or Enneagram? What are you, a 3 like me? Categories, personality stuff, self-help, all of that stuff. And sure, maybe you fit in a particular camp, maybe you know your Myers-Briggs type, maybe you know your top 5 strengths finders strengths, maybe you know your Enneagram, maybe you are up on where you are in the spiral dynamics thing. That's all awesome. I'm glad that you're doing the self-work, you're looking at that, and there is something about you, even though we can locate it on all of these various star charts that help you to understand you and that help us to understand you, there is still something beyond all those charts that makes you uniquely you. There's something that makes you uniquely you, and I think that the Bible and our tradition might think of that as a matter of the heart. We might talk about that in terms of identity, your inclination, your disposition. And in all of this, and again, we're going to get back to this in terms of the mind a little bit more next week. Maybe what we're really after with all of this, and I think what might best describe what the Shema is inviting us into, has to do with what we call the inner self. The inner self or the inner life. And I hesitate to even say it because it immediately creates that duality, right? The inner and the outer. But I hope you get what I mean. What I mean by the inner self is what's really going on inside. I'm talking about your true self. Your truest self that's not afraid of anyone or anything, so they don't have to put on a mask. Or they don't have to post certain things on Facebook, or they don't have to behave in a certain way at work, or they don't have to say certain buzzwords around certain people. I'm talking about your true, authentic, who you are, what's going on inside. So maybe a better word, even than inner self, is your character. So aside from the externals of persona, perception, job, associations, who you've convinced the world and others that you want to be, your Facebook profile, the inner self matters. What's really going on inside matters, and heart is the word for that, or it's the word that we're going to use for that. The character, the inner core from which the outer flows, the nucleus around which you sort of form your material reality. So let's look. We're actually going to use the Bible tonight, which I know is kind of crazy. We're going to look at a couple passages from the Psalms, and then we're going to flesh them out a bit, because the Psalms, if anything, these are sort of like OG emo poetry, right? Shouldn't we, David? Yeah, it's really like it's lament. And it's bipolar, right? Because it's like you've got lament, the world's over. God, where are you? Why have you forsaken me? And then the other stuff is like, everything's great. Praise the Lord. Everything's fantastic. So it's a little bipolar. It's a little emo. But the key is, so are we. It's honest. It's really honest to the human experience. So let's look at a couple passages. In the experience of the heart, they're not trying to do primarily theology or apologetics. They're not primarily trying to make this make sense for church people thousands of years later. These are songs, poems, and laments in the aftermath of life. They are very, if we could say nothing else, they're very heart-driven, emotional, raw, honest stuff. So Psalm 86. Teach me your way, O Lord, that I may rely on your faithfulness. Give me an undivided heart. Give me an undivided heart. So the prayer in this song, the cry in this song, we might say the response to the call of God in the life of this songwriter. They hear the call that we call God, and the response is, give me an undivided heart. So let's start here. As you think about your inner life, as you think about your character, is it put together? Or is it divided? And let's not make those binary, shall we? Let's say on the spectrum of put together and divided, do you feel like you're leaning more towards put together, more towards integrity of inner life, heart, and character? Or do you feel like you're more on sort of the divided, disintegrated side of that spectrum? I know I'll be honest and say, right now, I'm probably more on the divided side, but I'm working really hard to at least make connections and see some of those things come together. But just your own inner life, your own character. Is it put together? Does it feel more put together? Does it feel more apart? Is it whole? Does it feel integrated? Does it sound like harmony? Or does it feel kind of fractured and disparate? Does it feel split and kind of scattered? And these are none of this is attached to any judgment. This is a lens to help us, again, almost like the drone footage. This is a lens to help us take stock of the inner landscape of our lives, to ask honestly, and that's what happens during Lent, is we ask, what's going on in our hearts? What's going on with our intention? Are our hearts integrated, or are our hearts divided? We've probably all felt this. We've been confronted with moral dilemmas. I've felt this way, right? We've all felt this way, where I want this, but on the other hand, I'm committed to this. We've all felt this way with money, right? I want this, but I've made commitments and I have principles, and so I can't spend money on this even though I want this. And we've probably felt that way about many things. We felt that way about food. We felt that way about purchases. We probably felt that way about people, right? I know that this person is a person. I know they're a good person, but because of where I am in my life, I need to treat them like an object. I end up using people. And long before these are concrete choices, long before they're expressed, long before they're behaviors, there is an inner struggle going on. At least for me. Maybe I'm the only one, but at least for me, there's an inner struggle going on, and the psalmist says, God, make me whole in that way, right? They're saying, I've got a divided heart, and I want to be, we might say, I want to be a person of integrity. I want inner harmony where there is dissonance, where I feel divided, these inner contradictions. I want an integrated heart. I want all of the inner stuff to match the outer stuff. We might say, I want to be grounded, centered. There's all sorts of beautiful spiritual language. The psalmist says, God, give me an undivided heart. And I think if we zoom out, where we started last week, God is a call, and God is this call alone. And maybe the prayer, the practice for God to give us an undivided heart comes with the practice of us also listening, right? Maybe our divided heart is that sort of in one ear we're hearing that call, and in the other ear we're hearing a lot of noise. And maybe what happens during Lent or during certain seasons is that we make our practice tuning our ears to hear the call more, so that we feel less divided by both sort of what we hear in terms of selflessness and goodness and practice, and then what we hear over here in terms of being divided and hating and being right and being afraid. Maybe the undivided heart is choosing to hear the wholeness, choosing to tune both of our ears to that. Speaking of Parks and Recreation, one of my favorite episodes of I'll argue, one of the best shows of all time, is an episode about a health tax on soda, which is sort of a no-brainer. Nobody needs 64 ounces, much less a gallon, much less a toddler-sized soda, which is a soda the size of a toddler. But then the main character, Leslie Knope, is in this town hall meeting, and it becomes clear that people are going to lose their jobs. And so people start to make really good arguments for and against. And she's a genuine public servant. And what happens is she ends up with a divided heart. She's torn by all of this good external data, by all of these great arguments. There's great opinions. There's lots of emotion. She's got personal relationships. There's tons of political lobbying and capital to consider. But her mentor, second only to Yoda, Ron Swanson, basically says, trust your heart. He says, trust your heart. He essentially says, vote your conscience. And she does. You know what she does? She gets away from the noise. All she has to do is get away, and the decision becomes so clear to her. The undivided heart is revealed as soon as she steps back from the noise. Hearing the wholeness doesn't happen on accident. We have to tune our ears to listen past the noise. Psalm 51. The psalmist says, create in me a pure heart, O God, and renew a steadfast spirit within me. So I'll spill some tea on this one. This psalm is written right after David, the man after God's own heart, has committed adultery with Bathsheba on the roof. And right after this, you don't even know, maybe he's smoking a cigarette still, and he comes up with this. So create in me a pure heart, which is a really noble prayer to pray after you have committed adultery, you're getting ready to commit murder. But anyway, he says, create in me a pure heart, O God. This is language. This language is purity language borrowed right from the ritual language of the temple itself. Sacrifices, offerings, they had to be pure. They had to come in ritually pure in order to be used. And he's saying again here, let the inner life, the heart, match my exterior. And part of what he's doing is admitting that it doesn't match right now. Right? He's saying, I shouldn't be this way. This isn't right. David goes on to say, all these religious trappings, temples, sacrifices, rituals, he says God doesn't want that. And a lot of people go, hold on, because he's saying it in the Psalms, which again, they're like emo songs. They're very angsty. And so some scholars go, oh, well, is he just like overreacting? Is this hyperbole? Didn't God command in the Bible all of these sacrifices and all this stuff? No. David says God doesn't want it. He says, effectively says, don't believe everything the Bible says. He says it doesn't matter. All these religious trappings don't matter. It's an issue of the heart. He brings everything back to the purity of the heart. Not the purity of sacrifices, not the purity of priests, not the purity of temples, not the purity of blood, but the purity of heart. What's he talking about? That inner life, character, intention. He's talking about integrity. We might say our own oneness, our own put-togetherness. The integrity of our heart, hear the wholeness, mute the noise. The Kobayashi Maru is a fictional test created in the Star Trek universe. And the test is basically set up as a no-win situation. There is no right answer. There is no way to win it. You cannot beat the test. It's all about the person's character in the midst of certain defeat. Which is to say, it's about the integrity of heart. I mean, think about this. Think about this for you, as you consider what we mean by the integrity of heart. When you can't change the external situation, can you maintain the integrity of your own heart? When you can't change the external situation, can you maintain the integrity of your own heart? We've had a lot of practice in the last year because all of us have not been able to change the external situation of COVID. And we've had to learn a lot about the integrity of our own hearts. I have not been able to maintain the integrity of my own heart during all of this. It's okay. There's grace for that. When you can't change the external situation, can you maintain some oneness of heart, the integrity of your own heart? The other way we might ask this is in the form of the serenity prayer, where we say, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things that I cannot change, the courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. That's what this test looks like. And maybe David, maybe the psalmist David is saying it's not about the right answers in terms of ritual, in terms of sacrifice. It's not about getting that right and checking the box. It's not about winning with the purest offering. It's not about winning with the best prayers. It's a question ultimately about the purity of my heart. It's about the question of my character. It is an ancient Near Eastern Kobayashi Maru, right? Even if you can't win, the question is, how is it with your soul? Not soul. We'll get to that in a couple weeks. How is it with your heart? So Jesus, before he ever begins his ministry, before he ever teaches, before he ever gathers a following, before he ever heals anyone, he goes off into the wilderness and he has his own sort of Kobayashi Maru, his testing, his temptation. And like I said at the beginning, these texts are connected. The Shema invites an integrity of heart, mind, soul, and strength. Jesus in the desert is tested at the level of like heart and mind, soul, and strength. And the heart test, I think, is very interesting. It's not one that when I initially read through this text, I don't think that's a heart test. But it is, and I want to explain because I think it has something for us to carry into our practice this week. It says, after fasting for 40 days and 40 nights, Jesus was hungry, which is an understatement. The tempter came and said to him, if you are the Son of God, command these stones to become loaves of bread. But he answered, it is written, one does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. Bread alone. So you read that and you go, how's that a heart issue, right? That sounds like maybe a stomach issue or a gluttony issue, or, how is it a heart issue? Here's the deal. In the ancient world, bread is an archetype, right? Here's the bread. Bread is an archetype. It's a symbol. Bread is the work of our hands, right? This is bread. It's what we can do. And obviously, we don't make the sunshine. We don't make the rainfall. We don't make the seasons change. But we can plant, and we can harvest, and we can grind, and we can fetch water. We can mine salt, and we can build fire. We can bake bread. Bread is about the work of our hands. Bread is about what we can control. Our ability to manufacture life and to provide for ourselves. And I love Jesus' response. Making bread isn't bad. The work of our hands isn't bad. The work of our hands is good. Work is sacred. Economics is sacred. In fact, work is really good. It's necessary. It's vital. What he says is not that we shouldn't work. He says we can't live on bread alone. We can't live on bread alone. We can't live, another way to say it is, we can't live on the work of our hands alone. Which triggers that word from the Shema. The Lord is our God, the Lord alone. Right? What's being said? The work of your hands cannot be God because God is God alone. There's a deeper sustaining energy at work in the one source that we call God beyond what we can produce, beyond what we can manufacture, beyond what we can achieve, beyond what we can build. Life flows from God alone. The all-encompassing oneness, the all-encompassing Spirit in whom all that is, life flows from God alone. And this is sort of funny because when you find it, and this is a popular time to get radicalized, I realize that, but when you find this in religious extremism, the extreme religious answer would be fine, then don't trust the work of your hands at all. Don't cling in any form to your own control. Just trust God to provide. This is the true believer who breaks their arm in praise rather than calling 911. Just trust God. Here's the problem. And this comes from my experience. I've been here myself. There can be a tendency in what we call superstitious or supernatural religion to say, okay, I'm going to surrender control. Yeah, what is it? Jesus, take the wheel, right? Here you go. I'm going to stop trying to control whatever that is. God, I don't need to control my own provision anymore. I don't need to control my relationships anymore. I don't need to control my employment or my finances. I'm going to give up control, right? I surrender. But in that place, the person very often begins to try and control God. Not intentionally, but subconsciously, right? Almost superstitiously. So instead of the work of our hands being planting, harvesting, grinding, fetching water, mining salt, baking, the work of our hands becomes praying, serving, worshiping, giving money, sharing our faith, being really good, right? Believing really hard, believing really well, trying to earn it, to work at it. And here's the trick. And this is why I think Jesus is tempted by the tempter. Here's the temptation. We don't end up trusting God anymore. All we do is we change jobs. Bread making becomes God making. Bread making becomes God making. That's why the call of the Shema is a call out of idolatry. It's a call away from being people who think we've ever had our finger on the pulse of being able to nail God down. It's an issue of the heart because trust is ridiculously difficult and mysterious. I mean, how do we trust God, right? You think in order to love God, we've got to trust God. Well, how do we trust God with our heart? I don't know. I don't know. And listen, divinity school didn't help. I don't know how to trust God with our heart. Here's some ideas grounded in the truth that I don't know. And you may be picking up that theme. This whole thing, faith, the Shema, loving God, living faithfully, it's grounded in mystery. Because God is mystery. God is jazz in the sense that God does not resolve. Because knowing God, nailing God down to theology, to belief, to doctrine is just another way of controlling God. Right? Resolving God is just another way of making God the work of our hands. Trusting God begins with the reality that we don't ever get to control or manipulate God. That's why the Shema says, please listen up. Please listen up. The call of God is the call alone. Rob Bell says, the moment God's figured out with nice, neat lines and definitions, we're no longer dealing with God. So how do we trust God with our heart? How do we trust God with our feelings? Especially for some of us who grew up religious and we feel like we've been manipulated spiritually and emotionally abused and kind of vulnerable in these areas. How do we trust God with our heart? Maybe it begins, and yeah, I know we can get triggered, and I know that there are wounds, and I know that there are scars, but maybe it does have to still begin by extending our heart beyond what is safe and known. Maybe it does just begin with an invitation into some vulnerability. And I don't necessarily mean like make yourself vulnerable to people who can hurt you or abuse you. Absolutely not. Be safe. I mean the vulnerability that begins where we admit that what we know about God ends, where we open ourselves again. C.S. Lewis says it like this, which I think is gorgeous. He says, to love at all is to be vulnerable. And think about this in terms of how we love God, because especially at a church like Collective, that's sort of an ambiguous thing. To love at all is to be vulnerable. Love anything, and your heart will be wrung and possibly broken. If you want to make sure of keeping it intact, you must give it to no one, not even an animal. Wrap it carefully round with hobbies and little luxuries. Avoid all entanglements. Lock it up safe in the casket or coffin of your selfishness, for to love is to be vulnerable. To love is to be vulnerable. And I'll just say personally, I took about a decade off of being vulnerable to God. I retreated into my intellect. I retreated into the academy. I attempted to resolve God theologically, intellectually, philosophically, scientifically, metaphysically. And it's lonely. For to love is to be vulnerable, but also to be vulnerable is to love. And if you shut yourself off to that vulnerability, it gets to be a lonely place in spirituality. And I can't promise you that it's safe to be vulnerable to God again, whatever that means for you or however that might be experienced. But I know that if you don't at least try, that experiencing that love is going to be really tough. Because I think vulnerability is sort of the beginning of that, is an openness to, at least to knowing that we don't know and being open to it. So if we're honest, the bread making isn't the issue. The issue, as always, is the deeper posture of our hearts. For us to love God with all of our hearts, which is the invitation of the Shema, we have to make bread. Making bread is the easy part, right? You're going to get up tomorrow. You're going to go organize for social justice and draw a paycheck. I'm going to get up tomorrow.
6:30.
Yeah, tomorrow the rally's at 6:30. We're going to come back to that before we wrap up. Tomorrow I'm going to get up. I'm going to administrate this church. I'm going to work with people to try and make this work. We're heading towards Easter. You guys are going to get up tomorrow morning. It's Monday. We got to make bread. That's a given. You're going to get up. You're going to go make bread. That's the easy part. The tough part is how to find wholeness in our hearts as we learn how to both trust the bread and trust God. And I will be honest, I don't know how to do that. I don't think anyone knows how to do that. The only way to do that is to practice doing that. To trust the bread and to trust God. We need the bread. We absolutely need the bread, but not only the bread. And here's your sacrilegious blessing for the evening. In the same way, we need God, but not only God. We have to eat. We need the bread, but not only the bread. We need God, but not only God. An undivided heart, maybe one that strikes this balance between the bread and the God that we need to live. Between the work of our hands that feeds us and the unknowable mystery of God that sustains us. We need bread to keep blood flowing, to keep heart pumping, to keep breath breathing, but we need God to mysteriously sustain us. The source of our love, to be the catalyst for our creative thoughts and our imagination, to be the ground of our intention, to be the core of whatever it is that we mean when we mean character, when we mean integrity of human goodness. At the heart level, if we're really honest, the Shema begins by asking the question, what is our relationship with the work of our hands? Is it where we derive our sense of identity, our value, our security, our social status? Do we trust our lives to the work of our hands alone? Can we let ourselves be freed from this uncomfortable invitation? Maybe not even to trust. Maybe we're not there yet. But can we at least acknowledge that apart from the work of our hands, apart from bread alone, apart from the things we can control, there's a deeper source? There's a ground from which life and love flow. Deeper than you, deeper than your paycheck, deeper than your bread. And we don't control that source. The invitation of the Shema, what we see in Jesus, is simply leaning into that source, tuning our ears to listen to that call. neither holding God, neither holding God and discarding the bread, nor holding the bread and discarding God. It's not either or, it's both and. It's holding the bread before God and saying yes, or even better, holding the bread before God and saying nothing at all. Simply holding your bread making before God, who is the source of all, and saying nothing at all, and just seeing what happens. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart. With your inner self, your truest self, your real self, your deepest conviction, and the material expression of that, the work of your hands, and the vulnerability of your heart. The Shema is an invitation into the kind of love that renders us wholehearted, undivided, the kind of love where your heart reveals who you are, and who you are reveals your heart. When we come to the table, we come to celebrate this gift, the gift of an undivided heart, a whole heart. We come to remember Jesus, who when tempted with bread said, bread is not enough. He said, bread is too certain. Bread is too predictable. We also need the vulnerability of faith. We also need the risk of faith. We need the practice of not knowing. We need the risk of the mystery of God to keep us humble, the source of love that can be felt but never traced, experienced but never controlled, heard but never contained. We come to remember the kind of undivided heart that in the person Jesus of Nazareth lived and died to make this life manifest. Right? We've said that the only way the call becomes flesh is in the response. And Jesus' response to the call made this life and this call manifest, to make this invitation paramount. This was his response. What's most important? And he quotes this: love the Lord your God with all your heart. To take the possibilities and the potentials of our broken and divided hearts and to render them whole before our very eyes, within our very chests. The table of this wholehearted love is set for us tonight. It's open to us, and as always, is open to all people. And no one will ever be turned away. If you've got elements where you are, whatever they are, you may have noticed I have hot dog buns. We often in the past have used a Eucharist liturgy from Thich Nhat Hanh, in which he says, he effectively says it's not the magic bread. It's the way that we approach it with intention and mindfulness. So if you don't have at your house what you would describe as sacred bread, but you can find bread and you can receive elements sacramentally, it's in the receiving that the practice is sacred. So whatever that is for you, however you want to do that, join us. We're going to sing a little bit. And then we'll wrap things up and jump over to the Zoom. A little quicker. To see you cry, lying there in that position. There are things you need to hear, so turn off your ear and listen. Pain throws your heart to the ground. Love turns the whole thing around. No, it won't all go the way it should, but I know the heart of life is good. You know it's nothing new. Bad news never had good timing. Then the circle of your friends will defend the silver lining. Pain throws No, it won't all go the way it should, but I know the heart of life is good. Pain throws your heart to the ground. Love turns the whole thing around. Fear is a friend who's misunderstood, but I know the heart of life is good. And I know the heart of life is good. All right. Thank you guys so much for joining us tonight for the liturgy. The work continues here with us on the Zoom right after we start. The Zoom link has been shared in the chat, I do believe. Handful more shout outs. Hey, Karen Long, great to see you. Caroline Wilson, thanks for participating with us. Hey, Rick. Hey, Bill. Andrew Addison is on. Thank you guys so much for tuning in and joining us. We're going to jump over to the Zoom again. If you can't find it in the chat, it is in the email under the link tree. You can find it there. If you're having any issues, we'll stay on this chat for a few minutes and try and make sure everybody jumps in. We'll see you over on the Zoom momentarily. Grace and peace.